morning, everybody. I'm here with QX today to take your questions. So, what stuck out with you this week, QX? Seemed busy.
I had to honor Dan by muting myself and talking into the microphone. This week, let's see, busy week. Let's start with the SIGs, since I'm part of the Sigmanaut group. SIGs this week, we did something extraordinary, however you want to say that word. And we succeeded in our raffle fundraiser, which was for 5,000 ergs. And I think we got 5,300 or something like that. Ergs, which is absolutely fantastic. That's a great bootstrap to our treasury. We got some people asking questions, showing interest. So we've got a few more Sigmanaut applicants or SigCan applicants this week as well that we're going to vote on to bring into the ranks and abuse thoroughly. And beyond that, we got some donations from yours truly as well, Joe, which was appreciated. Joe really threw a ringer at us. If anybody tuned into the audio of last week's Sigmanaut Zoom meeting on Sunday, you'll see that there was a lot of discussion from a lot of different people. So that was very nice to see. We told Joe he's got to throw in a $10,000 donation every week so the discussions go that intense. So that was great. Sorry, go Joe.
Oh, I said that's probably a little bit beyond my limit.
So the good thing about that is it's really forcing, now that we have a treasury, now that we have, I think the number's at about $18,000 right now is worth, and then we're hoping for another donation of from another group for another 10, so we'll be around $28,000 for that Sigmanauts treasury bootstrap, which I think is a hell of a bootstrap for sure. So that does something unique to us. That puts us in a position to actually start being very serious about distributing these funds and finding ways to engage the community and outreach and things like that. So last week's meeting was that discussion to figure out what the hell to do. And thankfully we resolved nothing, which is, I think, a great way to end a meeting without any decisions or anything like that, just a lot of talk. And this week we were challenged with just brainstorming some ideas of what to do, how to outreach, how to do inside the community, outside the community, bring people in, what people think important is, all that kind of stuff on a sheet. And we're going to discuss it again this weekend to go from there. So that's us. It reminds me of that scene, Joe, if you've ever seen, I think I mentioned this before, The Fifth Element, where the bad guy knocks a glass over and all these little robots now have a purpose. Well, I think this treasury has knocked the glass over on the floor, and now the Sigmanauts seem to have a purpose here that we can move forward with and organize. So great start, great kickstart from the raffle, from your donation, from other donations, and I'm very excited about that.
So for people that are tuning in that have never heard of the Sigmanauts, who are you? What do you do?
I'm glad you asked, Joe. So the Sigmanauts are a community-based organization that is trying to do what Kushti said, and that is to take as much control over the ecosystem as you can, or the project. That means that, as the EF has said in the past, and as you hear from the community, that it's really a community effort, a decentralized community effort, and the Sigmanauts embody that. It's anybody that's interested in helping, anybody that has, 40 hours a week to help, or anybody that has 2 hours a week to just be around in chats and help out. There's a variety of different things you can do at different levels. So don't think, hey, I'm not going to be useful or that kind of thing. You are useful. If you can donate, 30 minutes of your time and show up to a Zoom meeting once in a while or in chats and suggest an idea that puts us on another path, that's a significant change and a significant help to the process. So any of that. So SIGs are the embodiment of that, embodiment of community that's working to sustain Ergo, push the mission forward, and really make it a thing out there. We have a website, sigmanauts.com, where we have our mission statement, as well as an application to apply to become a SigCan, which then you can be promoted to a Sigmanaut after a certain amount of time and have voting rights and committee rights. But that's about it, Joe.
Awesome. It's nice to see that type of community-based organization pop up. No, yeah, now you have some responsibility for something. That's always fun.
Yeah, yeah, or storage rent takes back the ergs in about what 2 million years, however long it takes to get that 5,000.
One way or the other, something's going to get done right.
Exactly. Yep. How about your week, Joe? What happened in the ecosystem?
Oh, there was a lot of noise, but sometimes that happens. In terms of, like, say, core updates, there's a lot that's going on in parallel that I'm excited about. We're pushing towards a new node release that's going to implement NepoPows, which, it's been a long time coming. It's pretty neat to see, research basically be supported, implemented, and put into production. That's been an idea, at least from the academic space, for 6-7 years now, and it's going to be fully supported, which is awesome to see. And there's a lot of interesting potential implementations for that I'm excited about. In parallel, I'm kind of watching new stablecoin frameworks come about, which in my mind is huge. Those are, basic primitives that just leverage the programmability of Ergo, give users options. And, we're seeing a lot of, pressure in this space regarding stablecoins, especially ones that are kind of coming out of centralized systems. So, this idea of having some kind of algorithmic or decentralized stablecoin has always been, let's say, an ideal, in my opinion, that's worth pursuing. So excited to see how those two new frameworks come out, in terms of ecosystem development. We're getting to the point where I can't say that I'm able to fully track everything anymore, which is awesome.
That's great. Yeah.
In terms of, name services, DeFi protocols, there's a lot going on. Lots going on.
Yeah, I love when I'll be on some social channel and somebody will say, "Oh, I've been in Ergo for 2 years," and I'll be like, "Jesus, I've never heard of you." Over in chats, you find yourself siloing in certain areas and realize that things are going on beyond where you're siloed.
Yeah, I've been on channel overload for a while in terms of trying to track things. So, I'm gonna get together with CW, put out our weekly developer update. And I can't even say that that's necessarily an accurate snapshot of everything that's going on. That's just who shows up for the week at that time, right? So there's some people that are there regularly. There's some that are in and out. And there are some, that build stuff and, we don't hear too much about it. So exciting stuff to see. I also would say that seeing, Fleet coming out with the TypeScript, package is huge, as it kind of really, advances the developer tooling. So that was another, really big update this week that I was excited to see.
Joe, can you hit me up? People might be a little confused about one thing that you mentioned earlier. So they've been hearing a lot of stuff about 5.012 reference node, where you could essentially bootstrap in 20 minutes with snapshots. And then they're hearing a lot about NepoPows in 5.0.13. Are those utilizing each other, snapshots and NepoPows, or are they totally different things that can bootstrap in different times and beyond that?
Yeah, they're a little bit different. Snapshot has to do with starting from a state that's basically, there's consensus that that's an accurate starting state that's shared in the nodes. So it's kind of like, let's back up even further with storage rent, right? We get this idea in Ergo that the UTXO state's going to be basically refreshed every 4 years. And so at some point, all of the data prior to 4 years is more of like a historical reference, right? You can assume that, the entire UTXO set is, going to be refreshed. Okay, it might take some time to consolidate storage rent. So, add a little plus or minus on the 4 years, but, you get this idea that, basically everything that's live is going to be within a certain age, right? Now, NepoPows are a little different. You're talking about using kind of a quirk in proof of work as a checkpointing mechanism, where every once in a while, you'll pop out a block that'll be mined with an extra zero. And so it's using that as kind of a reference point to compress chain history. So they're a little different, but they do go together. They're both, in a way, types of looking at a blockchain and saying, okay, well, how can we compress this data to get a faster sync?
So NepoPows won't be carrying around even the full active blockchain or UTXO set, whereas a snapshot is carrying around the full UTXO snapshot.
Yeah, it's going to be a little bit different. You're going to have block headers in NepoPows specifically, but kind of a compressed version of that. I'm excited to see how it works out. A lot of people will look at like the wallet side and say, okay, well, now you can run a client with full node security on your phone. That's pretty cool. But in my mind, actually, one of the more interesting parts is the ability to have infrastructure that's kind of wrapped around NepoPows, so people can run, off-chain infrastructure that's, looking at the chain or assisting in, making calls, scanning, indexing, all of that stuff, and having a kind of a lighter version of that infrastructure. A lot of the times when we talk about blockchain, specifically with scaling, people only look at the chain itself, right? And that's fundamentally short-sighted, in my opinion, because when you're talking about infrastructure that's built around a chain, depending on the weight of the chain and how much data you have to call and index, there's a lot to consider there long term beyond just the state of, let's say, that data set that is the chain itself. You have a lot of wrappers that are kind of built around these systems that are performing functions that make everything else work. And one nice thing about not only compression techniques, but kind of managing the state of the chain itself in terms of how heavy it's going to be, the ability to prune it, is we put ourselves in a position long term where that off-chain infrastructure isn't going to be centralized, because oftentimes people will just look at like, oh, well, what about the nodes, right? Decentralization of the nodes, and that's a popular topic. But people forget that oftentimes, you're using an explorer or you're using other infrastructure that's kind of built around the state of the chain. And oftentimes that becomes highly centralized, especially as these networks get bigger and bigger and bigger. So it opens up a path, in my opinion, that long-term could put, let's say you as a user, perhaps you have the ability to run like a lighter off-chain infrastructure as well, which really puts a nice, redundancy in the system, decentralization, right? And, who knows, maybe we'll get some, hybrid type of NepoPow client with an indexer built on top of it. And like, there's all kinds of really neat ideas that, get me excited. Maybe it's a little, I don't know, beyond where most people's heads at, but I'm really excited about this as like a technical development.
No, that's fun to hear it from that point of view and that aspect. I do know that, speaking of decentralization and things that somehow, from a technical debt standpoint, tend to edge towards centralization. And centralization, I mean as in scarcity. And that would be things like Explorer, the Explorer instance. I mean, ever since I set mine up, I lose a little sleep once in a while, wondering if it's still, if it's going to run through the night. I have to update, I have to bring it down, I have to tell people, that's a burden that not everybody wants to run. So So those kind of things, the easier they can get to do, the lighter the clients can get to do that, the less demanding on a machine that it is, then perhaps the more decentralization you get in running those kind of things, which is great in the long run.
Yeah, and potentially it's easier to package, and hopefully we get more people that are running that type of local hosting, right? Everybody loves to talk about decentralization in terms of I don't know, fluffy terms, but at the end of the day, it's all about the local host. It always has been.
Yeah, it reminds me of the term NIMBY, right?
NIMBY, not in my backyard.
Yeah. I love decentralization, but I'm not going to do it. Somebody else can run it.
Exactly. We live in a space where that's such a buzzword that, a lot of the times you'll have, decentralization advocates, and it's like, okay, well, what are you running? Nothing. Like, oh, okay.
Yep. What do you think about, we got some questions, but we can delay a little bit. What do you think about, I'm sitting in chat, what was it this week, mid this week, from last week and the week before, we've got some attention online from a recent, person on Twitter that has quite a few followers, making some polls on Ergo and that kind of thing about, pitting us against other, not pitting us, but comparing us against others, which, whatever, it's cool. But I found myself, heading into chat one day and seeing, oh, Jesus Christ, another goddamn poll that I have to go to and click on. But then a thought came into my head by like, that's great. This is work. It takes work to engage and continue to engage and sustain engagement. So this is great. I found myself doing that, which was an interesting thought process there. Are you out there voting, Joe?
Not always. A lot of the time, I don't trust it. It's the bottom line. My assumption is that something like that can be botted. So it makes noise, great. In terms of like the quality of content, and I like, let's break things down and look at assumptions and look at differences. That's never there. It's always just like, what do you like more? Snickers or Reese's Pieces, and then everybody's like, raw. I don't know. I think there's better discussions to be had that oftentimes aren't. But it's social media, so what can you do?
Yep, social media. And it's only botting if you lose, Joe. Otherwise, it's fair.
Yeah. Crazy train rolls on, right?
Yep.
Is what it is.
Well, you want to see if there's questions?
Sure. Why don't we hop on? Let's see. You have questions on your end, or you want me to pick them out?
It's all you, Joe. You run the show. You run the show, man.
Awesome. So first we have Augustus Kent. Said, hello, all. Do you think the industry has learned from its mistakes when it comes to bridges with security weaknesses? And do you know of any other bridges that are similar in design to the Rosen Bridge? That's a good question. Let's see. Let's try to pick it apart a little bit. Do you think that the industry has learned from its mistake when it comes to its weaknesses? No, absolutely not. But it's important to understand what the main mistakes were, right? And I would say, like, from the most basic level, something that happens in the crypto industry quite often is it's in a horse race, right? It's like, okay, QX and I are building similar projects with some similar goal. And so there's this idea that whoever is going to be first to market is going to capture market share and thus win, right? And maybe on a, I don't know, business side, there's perhaps some logic to that. But in terms of like net security assumptions and quality control and testing, it's a terrible idea, right? And so I would say, and I've said this before, right now, if you look at the state of the crypto space, probably the biggest horse race right now is in zero knowledge proofs. And, there's a ton of different setups that's, there's a new one, every week, give or take, from somewhere across the industry. And you have all of these people that are doing super complex cryptography with a really complicated stack that I would say most people don't understand the vulnerabilities, potentially on provers there. And so they're all horse racing to market, trying to take advantage of a trend that right now is popular. Okay. And so I've seen this before. The last time we saw this was, interoperability, and, a lot of things failed. And then before that, there was a massive focus and horse race, let's say on like DeFi protocols. And there was a lot of stuff that was just ridiculous in the end. And before that, it was very much based on throughput. And so we go back to like 2018, 2019, it's like, oh, we can do 5 billion trillion transactions per second. It's going to be great. And everybody's, horse racing and, I don't know, forgetting about like basic assumptions that they needed to look at. And so I would assume that, history doesn't necessarily repeat itself, but it does tend to rhyme. So I would assume that, right now in the zero knowledge space, we're going to see some massive failures. But, long term, I actually do think that, what survives tends to kind of set new standards. So it'll be an interesting game to watch, right? If you look back at, the throughput horse race that we went through in like 2018, 2019, it kind of led to this idea of, layer 2 solutions and different ideas about scaling on layer 1. And, if you look at interoperability, there was some that was, let's say, were more solid. They're still around. And then you had a lot of things that just blew up. If you go back to DeFi, you had a lot of just degenerate and, things that really made me scratch my head in terms of why is this popular or worth pursuing. But it did lead to new standards in terms of what didn't blow up, right? So has the industry learned from its mistakes there? I would say no. Definitely not. I still see the same horse race. I still see that same mentality. And one thing that you'll always find with that mentality is a lot of assumptions are just buried, right? So, you can look at, 2018 or so when, throughput was the sex machine in the space. Basically, nobody was talking about like the assumptions of centralization and where you put all this data and, okay, so you tested it and it had a trillion, jillion, transactions, but what were they? What was included? What was, was this a centralized environment? Was it, kind of in the wild? What was the setup, right? You never had any basic details. When you got into interoperability, you'd hear, oh, it's trustless. It's, the Great Bridge. It's in the end, like, 2 of 4 multi-sig, right? But you never heard that. You never saw that until it blew up. In terms of DeFi, you'd say, wow, look at this, $1,000,000% APY. It's going to change the world. And, at the end of the day, it's just debasing itself, right? So it's a money printer that's printing faster than the market can absorb. And maybe there's some degenerate game that's like, oh, but we're going to lock all of that value. And so we're going to print into a pool and the TVLs are going to go through the roof to the moon. And at some point, all of that printed tokens would go to market. And then, whoa, we got debased and let's fork it and do it again, right? So I don't see any real, change there. Zero knowledge proofs. It's just like, researching throughput, just like researching interoperability, just like researching DeFi. These are all really good ideas. But when you're in a horse race and you're developing something that's super complex and there's this pressure to, get to market first, and, basic assumptions are usually buried. And so everyone has this, mentality that like, oh, there's no risk. It's just going to work. Right. And let's look at all the sexy things that we can do with it. it usually doesn't convert for a while. Usually there's like a period of excitement and then mass sacrifice, and whatever survives tends to set a new standard. So I wouldn't say that that has changed, and that is what leads to security weaknesses. It's just what it is.
So I think when you were speaking about that, one thing that made me think of at least a positive for Ergo there is that with these horse races that you talk about, everybody in the horse race, people tend to forget that it's not the horses just racing for the finish line. It's that the horses are getting the shit beat out of them with a whip in the ass on the way to the finish line. So
win.
Ergo doesn't really have that. Ergo doesn't have a massive amount of, let's say, a VC sitting on the back, whipping the ass of the horse, telling you to get this product out of the gate before somebody else does so they can make money. So Ergo has a huge advantage in that aspect, where teams like MHS Sam's team can really sit back and analyze and do some serious research so that they can deliver a very solid product, as opposed to getting your ass beat with a whip to get to the finish line. So I think that's a huge advantage of Ergo that Ergo has over other chains, at least.
Yeah, and I would hope that having a collaborative open source community helps, because if you can collectively set a good standard for something, that benefits everybody. But a lot of the times in this space, instead of having 10 eyes on one thing, you have 10 eyes on 10 different things that are, basically proprietary in some sense, and they're all racing each other. And so there's no standard. It's more like, the 9 that don't make it don't set the standard, and then the one that does. And, hopefully there is some, standard or open source assumption that we can look at from that. But that's not always the case, even. That mentality hasn't changed. And, I went up to ETH Denver this year and, talk to different developers, just to see what's going on in that community. And yeah, that was what I left with, the feeling, ZK, his zero knowledge stuff is the new sex machine, that and AI, the AI. And so I would assume that there's going to be a lot of empty AI projects, and, zero knowledge proofs are going to put people in a horse race. That's a lot of horses are going to go down, and there's going to be some winners that set some really nice standards. So, afterwards, I was talking to Alex, and I was like, I think there's nothing wrong with sitting back and letting, that horse race and, sacrificial period that crypto goes through, play itself out. And, maybe in 3 years or so, we can look at the space, and there'll be, some good research, some things that have demonstrated their hardness through that process. And then we should really look at, implementing, some of these things. But trying to compete in the horse race when you don't need to is not always a wise choice. A lot of the time, there's a lot of data to be learned, looking at, what doesn't work. And that's kind of is what takes us back to Rosen is, Rosen, we're going to try to put the assumptions in the front rather than buried somewhere or, non-existent. And we're kind of building off of the dead bodies of everybody else.
One more info. We got some people in chats asking during the week about watcher opportunities to become a watcher.
Sure. So basically what watchers do is they run a type of redundant audit that's on chain. And it's important that you have this history stored on chain. That way you can look at who did what, right? Having that totally off chain is, in my opinion, a bad idea, based on, some of the failures that we've seen. So it's a good idea to have it on chain. That's way it's auditable. Now it does come with a cost, right? So you're posting data to a blockchain, which means you're posting a transaction, which means you need to actually have some cost associated with that action. Watchers themselves will need to have collateral, right? Now, those requirements haven't been made public yet, but we're having ongoing discussions in terms of what that should look like. And the reason why is you need some ability to enforce honesty, right? You kind of get into like a social dynamic where, if you can basically spam being a watcher at no cost, that's a huge problem. If there's no real cost there, the civil resistance of it, this idea that, it's not just one guy running, what they say, instead of multi-party computation, it's my personal computer. We've seen that in the bridge space fail. So you need a certain incentive to where if somebody's going to try to spam or create a false transaction, it comes at a real world cost, right? They have collateral up that they are potentially going to lose. And, the cost of that kind of scales with their attack in terms of how many watchers they try to run and force something through. In my mind, I would recommend a lot of people look at Rosen from the perspective of some kind of weird cross-chain exchange, right? Because it is implementing some exchange practices, mainly, hot cold storage. And so from the perspective of an exchange, what a user needs to do is more often than not, they need to give their personal information, right? Then they, a lot of people don't necessarily understand the structure of an exchange, but when you deposit, let's say, your ERG into KuCoin, you're depositing it into their wallet, right? They have complete custody of their funds. They're running some database in their backend that only they can see. That's managing all of the different sub accounts on their wallet and trying to manage funds in terms of what goes where. So there's a lot of unknown assumptions that we have to make in terms of how many people can sign for that wallet. We don't know, right? We can have some idea in terms of hot cold, because at least that requires some on-chain activity. But there's a lot of just unknowns. There's this idea of, we're going to have proof of reserves. So exchanges are going to, audit themselves, but they have products, that give them liability, which is a issue potentially in terms of their actual solvency or liquidity at any given point in time that we can't see, right? So there's a lot of things that users are inheriting working with, let's say, custodial environments that, they're not aware of. Rosen, is breaking assumption is a multi-sig, and instead of being something that's like 2 of 4 and buried way in the back 40 and nobody actually knows, they just hear the marketing pitch. Rosen's trying to say, okay, if your assumption is going to be multi-sig, let's make that as robust as possible and let's put it in the front, right? And if you look at what the watchers do, they're independently and redundantly auditing every single transaction multiple times. That doesn't happen in exchanges. So, if you look at it from that standard of like custodial environment to custodial environment, I think that it's just giving users much better assumptions, taking the KYC burdens off of them. From the project side, it gives you access to liquidity without huge costs and market making costs and legal costs. And, all the money that the Ergo Foundation has paid to play in that environment, hopefully projects that, come after us don't need to deal with all of that nonsense.
So that could essentially also, Rosen could act as a potentially, depending on cost-wise, could act as a on-ramp to Ergo for some U.S. customers as far as that goes. If I have access to ADA in Coinbase, I can buy a bunch of ADA, swap it over to through Rosen to Ergo, and then hopefully somebody's made a R-ADA slash ERG trading pair on Spectrum, and I can have my ERGs that way. It's a couple extra steps, but it sure seems nice, and it keeps me out of the CEXs as much as I can, I guess.
Yeah, I would say that's definitely true. I think it's, also interesting for proof of work coins that, don't have to deal with on-ramps because they're, essentially the creators of other network coins, gives them a chance to do something with that. My assumption and what I'll always tell people is if you're a general user, whenever you're using a type of bridge, you can definitely pursue whatever, type of strategy or token or asset you want. But I think it's a good idea, just like in exchanges, to head towards self-custody, right? There's a lot of talk in the space in terms of, get your coins off exchange, self-custody them. Well, even when you're using something like Rosenbridge, I think it's a great idea to always move towards self-custody. That's going to give you the best assumptions.
Awesome. Any more questions?
Yeah, sure. Let's see. Windy Moon says, hi. Do you think there will always be a role for the EF and or Sigmanauts, or at some point the market burden will be taken over by projects building on Ergo? What do you think, QX?
Well, I mean, that's the hope of the Sigmanauts. The hope is that, we develop some sort of plan or system in place that allows the Sigmanauts Treasury to be funded without too much of a burden on the community or projects for that matter, and gives us a sustaining effort in the gives a sustaining enterprise as far as that goes. And so if that's the case, if we can build some sort of group that's community-based, fair, community-oriented, then it's our responsibility to do that outreach and advertising essentially for the projects and the community that Ergo is. So yes, I do see Sigmanauts becoming a big player in that in the future once we have more of a hard line driven with how we're going to fund ourselves and how that's going to be sustainable. Because I mean, as you said in chats, Joe, with your donation, you said I'd much rather give that to the Sigmanauts than spend 10K on one goddamn article and then it's done the next week.
If you want a front page article on like CoinDesk, that'll run you about 30K. Given current prices, which is ridiculous, right? It's sad to see so much of this space is just pay to play, but that's the state of the state. Like, let's not kid ourselves. So, I see that as, I don't know, kind of borderline like just bribery, right? And so a lot of the times when I hear people screaming like, you need to market more, where are your articles? It's like, well, I would rather pay developers to do something than pay 30K for an article that either we write and we just pass along, or somebody who's not going to do their due diligence and write a shitty article anyway. I mean, that's not necessarily popular to say in this space, but that's the state of reality, is that the majority of the time, those are not public services, right? They're not there to teach users about, let's say, the intricacies of blockchain and how to protect yourself and how to audit and assess risk. No, they're trying to sell stuff, and it's just paid advertising, right? It's like a bad infomercial many times.
Yeah, and that's a challenge of the SIGs, is to find that balance of how, what of these, which of these is worth it, which of these isn't, what methods can we use to really utilize the funds that the community trusts us with. So it's seemingly a high responsibility there with when you're dealing with funds that people donate, especially in the bottom, hopefully the bottom of a bear where, it's really hard to part with your ergs.
I would say directly to Windy Moon's question, what I would love to see is for the EF over time to be kind of decentralized, where you have a group of competing interests that, assist with core protocol development and, long term, I hope that these Sigmanauts, have their own competing. I'm sure that whenever you get a group of people, what you get is politics, disagreements, different philosophies, different ideas. And, at some point, I assume there will be, other community things in parallel. I hope, right?
I would love that. I think nothing would be better for the SIGs than have like the anti-SIGs or the Ergonauts group. That would be fantastic.
Exactly. So I would love to see that type of, competition emerge, long term. No, hopefully they play well. Sometimes that leads to all kinds of fun drama and nonsense, but I do think that in a way it's a sign of maturity, right? It's a sign that the space is not dominated by like one entity that everybody has to come and ask for permission or, beg for changes. Rather, it becomes more of a distributed fight for what's the best idea, what's the best path forward. And I actually think that having, those opposing, points of view and kind of the debate marketplace of ideas long term is a good thing. Let's see. Let's see. What other proof of work projects have a piece of innovative technology that Ergo would like to explore? I'll take that. One nice thing about Ergo is that we have this incubator of really interesting ideas that never actually get implemented, and that's from Bitcoin, right? If you actually look at a lot of the core, let's say, features of Ergo that make it unique, whether it's storage rent, or Sigma protocols, or fill in the blank. A lot of that actually did come from Bitcoin research initially, where you have a huge R&D department. The problem is there's never any D, it's all R, right? It's always, look at this great research, look at this potential solution over here, look at this potential problem and, how that might be addressed long term, but it never actually gets converted. I think that maybe one day, that will change, but given the current state of the space, I expect Bitcoin to be very glacial in terms of, how it slowly will, implement something ever so often. But in terms of like innovative technology, it starts with research, right? And right now, probably the heaviest research in the space is generally, around Bitcoin in terms of like solid assumptions. There's also some really unique research being done right now, as I said earlier, about zero knowledge proofs. I think it's probably a little early. We kind of need that process of growth and, competition and mass death to see what the new standards are going to look like. And it could be, some new beast that's not even, out yet, right? So I think there's definitely a lot to watch there. So it's worth investigating always. That would be my take.
What's your answer to, we get a lot of people in chats that ask about, and circling back to earlier, try not to take up too much of this question, but I guess quick answer. TPS, a lot of people that just come into the Ergo space are seemingly put off by a 2-minute block time average. And they push, can anything be done to increase the block time kind of thing?
The simple answer is like, what could be done to increase the block time? A hard fork, right? You can reprogram the network. Do I think that's a good idea? No. Why? Because it has to do with proof of work attack vectors, right? And when you get into this idea of reorgs and, long horizon attacks and like there's so much complexity there that has just been buried by stupid marketing. It's the exact same thing I was talking about earlier in terms of, like the mistakes in terms of bridges, right? There's a lot of complexity there. And, when you get into, let's say TPS as an example, you have a lot of things that are interconnected where they have to kind of balance each other, right? I could use the example, okay, let's have a, jillion million TPS, right? And then it's like, okay, well, what's going to happen to the state of the chain? It's going to get a lot faster and growth, right? It's going to get bigger. And then when you have off-chain infrastructure that's required to, index, scan, and use that state for kind of, I guess, just network operation in terms of what you can do with these systems, it becomes harder and harder and harder. I mean, even Ethereum at this point is starting to consider this idea that they need to manage the state space or have some sort of tax or something like that, because they realize that as the state of that data set gets bigger, you're kind of racing towards a cliff, right? Where, so even though in the short term, okay, you scaled and you can grow the state of the ledger, at some point, if you're going to have to reuse all that data, it makes everything else grind slower, right?
But Joe, that's fine right now. It's not bothering us right now. It's the future people that'll have to deal with that. Come on.
Well, it's one of those things. I understand the sexiness of simplicity in marketing, but a lot of the times there's a lot that's buried in the details that really needs to be understood in terms of, proper engineering and design decisions.
Another big thing that I try to mention when people ask that is a lot of protocols so far are built on the average block time of 2 minutes. So you have things like SigmaFi, you have other smart contracts that rely on block heights to release or to allow release or allow spending of a UTXO. So let's say you hard fork and you make Ergo 1 minute block times. All of a sudden, all your SigmaFi contracts are going to be up in half the time than they were before, since the block times are going to come twice as fast now. So
yeah, and the thing is, how many people look at proof of work attack vectors? How many people care about reorgs? Like that's getting. It's just buried in the weeds at this point. Nobody cares, right? They say, "Oh, faster is better." And it's like, well, there's trade-offs there that everybody needs to be aware of. So let's see. I can't say that that will ever improve. And man, you see this every single time that there's like this mass. I don't know. You get the sex machine, right? That's what I call it. TPS was like the 2018, sex machine where everyone's like, oh, TPS is so great. And, usually you get people that just parrot the same marketing stuff and they don't actually look into the back end and say, okay, well, what's the pros? What's the cons? What's the trade-off? How do you do that? So one of these things where, how you have all of these different transactions per sections and they're all just like messaging data or something, like really basic P2P, like what's happening? A lot of times there's not that level of scrutiny or detail or thought. Critical thinking is these systems are hard at the end of the day. Like there's a lot of balancing factors that's just never makes it to the front end where people look at. All right, what else do we got? Oh, I got a question for you from Rico Staines. What is the plan for the Sigmanauts Treasury if users on Twitter are doing the social media marketing?
I think the best idea is that we just continue to let them do that for free and then spend the Treasury on like bonbons and cocktails. Might be the best idea.
Terrible answer.
Well, that's part of what we're trying to decide. We're trying to decide the best way to engage and reward the community that are doing the hard lifting and heavy lifting. I mean, I go on Twitter and there's a handful of people that are absolutely amazing at engaging on Twitter. Some a little more vicious than others, but for the most part, everybody's, keeping it above boards, which is fantastic. Some of them are SIGs, some of them aren't SIGs, but that's the crux of the issue. We need to figure out how to harness that, how to utilize that, how to incentivize people doing that, and moving forward. So I'd say Twitter's a part of the big picture puzzle in our sessions and what we're trying to brainstorm out and move forward with. But it's in there, and it's not. It's definitely what's the word I'm looking for? It doesn't go unnoticed of how much effort you guys put into Twitter and how much effort you guys engage in Twitter. So that is definitely on the table of how we're going to harness that and encourage you to do that and potentially reward you to do that moving forward. So yes, that's on the table to talk about. Yep.
All right, next we have Steven. Do you think projects which incorporate both the blockchain and the DAG structure subject themselves to additional attack vectors? Of course. Yeah. What else? So we have Zimula Art. That's terrible. I'm sorry, I murdered your name. Too early in the morning. We all know that fiat has infinite supply, so why peg our stable coins to it? I'm a fan of pegging a stable coin to the 200-week moving average of ERG and back it by ERG. That's a good point. I would say, why are we pegging stable coins to what? Centralized banked garbage coins, right? Where that have an unknown supply and have at least in the US, we have a secret committee of wizards that meet on the Hill and they go in and they talk about each other, and we look at the fireplace, and every once in a while white smoke comes up and they're like, oh, this is the new economic policy until next meeting, right? It's kind of a bad system to, peg long-term decentralized money to. I think it would be much more interesting to find other, whether it's, a basket of assets, commodities, crypto, indexes, whatever, something that would be more interesting than just, artificially manipulated currencies, which we're trying to get away from. But that mindset is so hard to escape because it's what people's carrying costs in life are, because they don't have the ability to opt out.
I mean, even as a new crypto user, it takes a long time for somebody to start, looking at your prices in ERGs or ADA or whatever currency. Everybody usually defaults to USD or whatever currency they're part of. It takes somebody really in the game for a while to just want to look at things at their ERG value or their currency value. But that's the point of DEXI, right, Joe? You can peg the damn thing, take that and peg it to whatever the hell you want to. Oil, gold, the price of cheese in Wisconsin.
Yeah, I actually do think that that's interesting, because then, you have some notion of a pair versus like, inflationary costs usually, of other assets. But, the goal should be to retain purchasing power, right? That's why some people are, all about metals, or, I guess even Bitcoin is kind of gaining that traction more broadly, is how do you store your purchasing power in a way that doesn't just get debased as people print. That's a hard question, because it's one thing to say, okay, it's great, you've stored your purchasing power, but we also need to think realistically and say, okay, well, if you're talking about purchasing power, you're talking about using that as a vehicle for monetary exchange. And that's usually where crypto is very, very immature, is that, we lack the ability to buy, sell, purchase, pay for things in crypto or some type of crypto derivative. And, I guess one reason why we've seen so much, adoption of fiat stable coins is that it's what people are used to, right? It's what people can pay for. And so it gives them some notion of like looking at things one-to-one, hopefully, unless, you're investing in some complete fucking nonsense like Tether, or not Tether, the Lunaterra, and it blows up, and, then you have no purchasing value there. But I understand why it's adopted. I've always, been an advocate of, hey, we should move away from this, but it's not how most people think. Right. And that in and of itself is a huge barrier that I would say it's a challenge we should break through.
I mean, we're in kind of a hybrid mode right now with the integration of both systems living in parallel with each other. So, I mean, yeah.
Let's see. We have John Smith, who said, "Was storing all your ADA as Rosen ADA in your wallet or your Ergo wallet be a good idea? Are there extra risks versus regular ADA? As it would be handy to be able to use Erg wallet for everything." Yeah, you're always, whenever you're talking about a bridged asset or a synthetic asset, you're inheriting extra risk, right? Now, why do people do that? Well, it's usually a function of ease or economic utility, right? It's the same question. Why do people leave their funds on exchanges? Because it's easy. Why do people, potentially take a token and put it into, the custody of a smart contract where there's extra assumptions because there's some notion of profit, right? So it's usually one of the two. I can't say that for every user, good idea. Sometimes, if somebody really, I don't know, doesn't know what they're doing, maybe it's better they don't send their coins into space. I can't say that that's always going to be the best idea, to self-custody their coins, depending on the technical expertise of the user, right? And then in terms of like the profit side, let's say that somebody can, take an asset and earn some sort of return or yield that, is then profitable. I can't say that's not a good idea. It's just, you have to look at the risks and trade-offs involved. I'll always be an advocate for self-custody. And I do think that long-term we'll probably see pairs, which will be interesting, right? So you may have, environment, let's say in terms of like Spectrum, will have the ability to have, Ergo, Rosen, and let's say like Ergo paired. So you have like the ADA derivative and the Ergo pair in one spot. And so then you can use liquidity to balance each other. And I think that over time, it will hopefully build towards, the kind of unwrapping and moving home will just be easier, right? You can look at something like wrapped Ethereum, where it's just kind of, it's pretty simple to do, to wrap and unwrap Ethereum. I hope that long term, we see that with Rosen assets. That way people can self-custody and, they can use the bridge to access liquidity and then move towards best assumptions, which is what we already see with exchanges. That's why I kind of like that as a comparison. If I send something to an exchange and I, do some kind of swap, it's good to withdraw it and put it back in my custody. And even though you're talking about segregation of custody through multi-sig, that's hopefully, in the front, and we get a really good idea of, the threshold in terms of how, custody is segregated, people still move towards best assumptions, which is always you're the one in charge. You have your keys.
I would add, sorry, go for it, Joe.
I was just going to add the caveat, but good idea is hard to make universally true. So, you have to also look at it from that perspective as well.
I would add too that, if Rosen becomes this amazing hub between blockchains, there's some incentive for to hold your tokens on the Ergo side in the Rosen version of the wrap token. So let's say that for now, let's say Rosen's up and the bridge between ADA, Cardano, and Ergo's here, and that a lot of US customers are now going to be funneling through Cardano to Ergo to switch to Ergo so they can buy Ergo. So you might say, hey, I'm going to forego my ADA staking because you won't receive staking rewards by doing this. I'm going to dump all my ADA over to the Ergo side. I'm going to enjoy the liquidity pool because a ton of people are swapping. I'm going to make fees off that. And then, then I'll swap back at that point if it ever dies down as far as that goes. So those opportunities are there that might give you some incentive to want to hold wrap tokens instead of your native tokens.
Yeah, that you get into the profit side, right? The profit side is sometimes can transcend that. But, I know that it's contrary to most public facing things in crypto, there's no such thing as profit without risk. And anybody who tells you otherwise is fucking lying to you, and don't believe them. Just the truth and everything in life. There's no such thing as risk-free profit, right? You're always inheriting some risk. And I would hope that at least people take the time to try to understand what those risks are so they make, more informed decisions. There's always some assumption to look at. It's just is what it is. Now, I will say that sometimes that profit incentive is worth the risk. And so people, take on additional risk and seek return. That's normal. That's how markets work, right? But, I'll never be someone that's just like, oh, it's risk-free. It's only up only. Like, oh, sometimes, just want to make some heads roll when I hear that kind of nonsense. All right. Anything else to cover? I think we're pretty much past 8 o'clock. That means it's time for me to refill my coffee.
8 o'clock. It's 10 o'clock here, Joe.
Well, I got a little bit more jealous.
Yeah, I think we got all the questions, or most of them. HQ asked about the Sigmanauts, but like usual, HQ rolled in 5 minutes late, and we already explained it.
Cover it, QX, because we rarely have you here, and it's a pleasure. So let's dive into your area of expertise. High quality Ergo said, I heard about Sigmanauts Treasury. Tell us more about it, please.
All right, we'll do a recap from the beginning for those of you that just joined us late. So the Sigmanauts had a raffle going for about 30 days. It was fully funded. Excuse me, with about 5,000 ergs, 5,300 something ergs, which is absolutely amazing. We had a generous donation from Joe. We've had some other community donations, erg champions, the NFTs, and hopefully another donation as well in the form of SPF coming. So our treasury should hopefully be soon up to about 28,000 equivalent US dollars. Which is an amazing bootstrap. So it really challenges us to get serious, get our shit together, and figure out what the hell we're going to do moving forward. So that was last week's meeting. It was a great meeting, a lot of discussion, a lot of different people chatting and putting in their opinions. And it didn't stop there. There was a ton of chat beforehand in the Sigmanauts channel chat and Discord and Telegram, as well as this week talking about it. So right now we're kind of in a brainstorming session to figure out how we're moving forward. Ideally, I'd like to see subcommittees be formed, something like some sort of social, I hate the word marketing, some sort of outreach committee or engagement committee formed that the Treasury could give an allowance to, and then they could essentially be autonomous in engaging the community and going on the mission forward based on that. So that's where we're at right now, just in the brainstorming session, but exciting times, and we really, really would love to have more people on board to make those decisions. I feel like I'm beating a dead horse. But everybody that comes in and says something about it, I say, hey, why don't you join in and help make the decision and help push it forward? And as I said earlier, even if you think, I can't devote 10 hours of the week or 20 hours of the week, it doesn't matter. If you have like an hour a day, an hour a week, if you jump in chat once in a while, if you find yourself in chats, then you'll be part of the SIGs channel. And then you could, offer some ideas up. That's all we're looking for, kind of thing. Just get the diversity of ideas flowing through, because, one brain, a couple brains is not going to do this. It's going to take the collective of everybody and everybody's opinion, everybody's thoughts and experiences moving forward to have the best outcome here, for sure. Joe's already a Sigmanaut, I think. Joe's definitely already a Sigmanaut.
I'm not a Sigmanaut. I'm just a guy that harasses the meeting and listens to people.
Are you sure you're not on the Sigmanaut list?
I might be. I have no idea. If I am not the best one, I'm sorry.
I disagree, Joe.
Do you know how to code, or do you need to know how to code to be a Sigmanaut? I would say no. Nope.
HQ's a Sigmanaut, and he codes like shit. Just kidding, HQ. You don't have to be a coder. There are plenty of non-coders there. There's only a few coders there, actually. So Yeah, nope, you don't have to be a coder. You can be anything you want to be. You can be a unicorn.
Nice. Well, that's the dream, QX. Let's see. All right, everybody. We'll be dropping the Ergo weekly developer update this Sunday. Any closing thoughts, remarks, QX?
No, just please, if you guys are interested in being SIGs, do it. It's one thing to spam your opinion in chats every once in a while when you're pissed off. It's another thing to spam it into a group that's actively trying to engage and move Ergo forward. So two big differences there. So why not do it in that group, the second group, as opposed to the first one, and be part of the mission and part of making Ergo better?
No, it's a very good point, man. The easiest job in the world is to be one of these philosophical critics that never has to actually do anything, right? But when you get into actual management and choices and responsibilities, life gets a little harder. So I would recommend everybody out there pick up the torch. All right, everybody. Thanks for tuning in. I hope everybody out there is going to have a good week, and hopefully we'll see you all next week.
Ciao, everybody.